glasses off to give it. I can't read with glasses on. That's the first thing I do. The next thing I do, I tell a couple of jokes, but we do those later on in between some of the war tales. But, however, I want to thank the ladies and men. Oh, you're gentlemen, but when a group like this gets together, you're men, you're not gentlemen. Veterans are men. So I'm very honored to be able to speak to you. I'm going back into the history of how I became an officer and a little of the background of what before the war, what things were like. The CMTC, Citizen Military Training Camp, maybe some of you gentlemen know about it, but when I was 17 years old, I started training there. 1 month a year with the regular Army, and we had a group, went to Fort Meade, Maryland first, and then during the year, you had to work a correspondence course with the old War Department. You did that for 4 years, and at the end of the 4 years, you went before a board of officers. There's the 4 colonels were sitting there in a row when I went in and saluted. And here I am, 20 years old, and really more or less half-baked, or whatever you want to call it. But one of the colonels said to me, he said, look, how are you going to be an officer in the United States Army? You never even graduated from high school. And that was true. I walked out of high school because I was wasting my time. And so he looked at me a minute, didn't say a word, and finally one of them said, you are now a second lieutenant in the United States Army. So I was 20 years old, and I was a very happy guy because I could not have been a private. So anyway, that's how I got started. Then after that, I spent 2 weeks at Fort Monroe in training in 1938, I believe it was, and that was a little ORC training. Something very interesting, there was a West Pointer. We sat under a tree down there this one afternoon. He spoke to about 20 of us, and he had just come in from Germany. And he said, I want to tell you gentlemen something, the future is not good. He said, we're going to war, there's no question. He said, I was as close as I am to you now, 20, 30 feet away from Adolf Hitler when he was speaking. He said, if Hitler had said to me, get up and march out and walk into that fire over there, I would have done it. He said the man was fantastic. He had a tremendous magnetism. And he said I could see why the Germans followed him. Well, anyway, that was that situation. In 1940, they called for the first group of reserve officers to come for 1 year. Served 1 year in the Army, with the regular Army, and I signed up and I went to Fort Monroe, Virginia, the only moated fort in America. And went down there as a second lieutenant. I was married. I married in 1939. I could take my wife with me. So anyway, we got officers' quarters inside the moat, and the quarters we had were next door at the building built in 1812, next door to Robert E. Lee's headquarters. And there's a plaque up in front of the place now saying Robert E. Lee lived here as second lieutenant. And Harry Blanck and his wife lived there also. So anyway, we had, that was quite an unusual thing and very interesting. Now in those days, I used to go in, Captain Gordon Holderman, or Lieutenant Holderman, he was a West Pointer, he was on the football team, but I was in his battery. This was the Coast Artillery at that time I was in. And he used to tell us, he said, you know, men, when he's talking to the officers, 2 or 3 of us, he said, we're going to war. This was in 1940. He said, it won't be long. He said, we're going to war. He said, no question about it. And he said, we're getting ready. But if I wasn't doing anything on a Wednesday afternoon, he'd say, go to the officers' club and go swimming and have a good time. We didn't worry too much about going to war in 1940. We just had a good time in general. The officers' club was right across the street from where our headquarters were. Saturday nights, we used to go over there as a group, and we'd have more fun, I'll tell you. And it was grand, great living. That was in 40. So as time went on, then the general would have about every month he'd have a gathering of the officers. And the first time we went in, I went in with Ruthie, and I'm standing there having a drink, and a couple of these West Pointers come over to me and say, oh, what class of West Point were you in? I said, I was CMTC. And they'd excuse themselves and walk to the other side of the room. But that was the end of the talk with me. But it so happened, my wife, Ruthie, was and it still is a very pretty girl. But in those days, she was quite a knockout, and the general took a liking to her. So anytime Ruthie would come in, the general would come over and put his arm around her and say, oh, I'm so glad to see you again, Ruthie. So that got me places, too. But anyway, we did all right in that. We had a grand time for that year. Then I was sent over to Pendleton, Camp Pendleton at Virginia Beach, and that is where I was the day the war started, when the Japs bombed. It was a Sunday, of course, as you fellows all know, and we went over there, and Charlie Downs and his wife were going to meet us, and we're going to have dinner at the Cavalier Hotel in Virginia Beach. We met them, and we went up and sat down and had a drink and talking a while, and after about a half an hour of conversation, he said to me, "Oh, Harry," he said, "the Japs bombed Pearl Harbor this morning." I said, "Charlie," I said, "what did you say?" He said, "the Japs bombed Pearl Harbor." I said, "My Lord, Charlie, and you were just telling me now?" So I said, "You know, we're at war." So, and the next day, of course, we heard Roosevelt declare the war and so forth. Well, anyway, after that, I was at 2 or 3 different bases. Of Fort Bliss, Texas, one of the places where we organized this 40-millimeter outfit I was with, the 531st. And I got the men. I was the commander of the headquarters band at that time, and we got the men lined up, and I had to pick out the sergeants and so forth, and the other fellows that were going to be this and that, corporals and what have you. We stayed there for a while, and then we went out to the desert. We trained with the desert training, some of Patton's elements. Well, we were training for desert training because we were going to fight in the Africa area, and that's what we were going to do. So we spent 9 months out there in that desert. If any of you gentlemen have been in the desert training, you know it was not too much fun. 120 in the day, 130 in the day, and almost as hot at nighttime. Sitting there one night watching a movie in the sand, and all of a sudden one of my men knocked me over and said, "Captain, look out, my Lord, look out." And here was a sidewinder. It said, "The sidewinder is just getting ready to strike you." Well, sidewinders are a dangerous snake, as you may know. We had scorpions, we had all kinds of nice things out in the desert. And it was different kind of living, and it was an experience. Then we had only, my wife and the men, my lieutenants, their wives, they stayed together. And Edgar Bergen, who you may remember, Edgar Bergen, he lent his house in Palm Springs to the wives of the officers of my outfit. And they stayed there, and then finally they got into Banning. Ruthie and the girls got into Banning. And we used to get in every other week for overnight. That was our time off from the desert. So anyway, that goes on to the let's see. I'm bouncing around a little bit here because we're going to head right on over to. Well, after the desert, we went into the Richmond Army Air Base. Now we were only there for maybe a month or two, and then they shipped us up to the fort up there at Boston. I can't think of it. Probably some of you men know. And we stayed there until the 12th of February. The day before, the 12th of February, we actually left there, and we said goodbye to Ruthie, and we all said goodbye to our wives that were married and what have you. And we went down to Boston, and we loaded up on the Empress of Australia. Well, the Empress of Australia was an old passenger ship built in 1912, and it was really old, and about 25,000 tons, and we were the center ship of the whole convoy. But the interesting part of it was, as an officer and the other officers on board, we ate in the dining room. We had service. The waiters came out in their uniforms and served us real nice meals and so forth. This went on for one day. The commanding general of the ship, our commanding general, came in and said, "Gentlemen," he said, "you're not coming in here again this trip." He said, "You're going to go down below and help the men out, help feed them and take care of them." And he said, "You'll take turns." And he said, "The men will be in here one day a week. They'll rotate." And that was a good general. And I went down below, and I'd sit down there for maybe a 12-hour stretch, whatever it happened to be, and I'd watch these men eat this liver that was given to them, and I couldn't stand it. And then I'd come upstairs and maybe get a little better meal. I don't know. It wasn't much better at the time, but that was an interesting trip across. We left on Lincoln's birthday, and we landed on Washington's birthday in Liverpool, which is rather unusual, too. It was a long time between. We went very slow, and at nighttime, I'd go out on the deck when there were no lights, and I could make out silhouettes of the destroyers that were going along with us and what have you. And so we landed there in Liverpool. We stayed in England for, maybe, well, we stayed in England till D+8 But we were in England. We were at a place called Hereford above London. And at nighttime, we used to see the Germans coming over, and they'd be bombing London. And you'd see the fire start. The sky would start getting red. And it was a pretty nasty sight to see. During that time, I helped out as an entertainment officer. That's what I was doing, going down to London, picking up names on the stage and what have you, bringing them up to our outfit, and they'd entertain in some form or another. This one trip, I went down, and maybe some of you ladies and gentlemen have heard of Bebe Daniels. Bebe Daniels was quite a famous girl in her day. She was married to Ben Lyon. Well, Ben Lyon was a colonel, and Ben Lyon was a star in a movie called Wings. Well, when I was a little kid, 8, 9, 10 years old, I loved that movie, Wings. Little did I know I'd be meeting the colonel one day in this situation. But I went in to see Colonel Lyon. I had no problem seeing him. And I said, Colonel, I'd like to have Bebe come out and entertain the men. He said, good idea. He said, I'll tell you what you do. You go down the stage door of this particular theater, knock on the door and tell them Ben Lyon, Colonel Lyon sent you. So I did, and sure enough, they let me in, and they took me to her dressing room. And I said, he took me in and sat me down. He said, look, she's out on the stage. She'll be back in about 5 minutes. She'll be done. So I sat down. Bebe Daniels came in, and the minute she came in, she started undressing. And I started to get up. I said, Bebe, I'll come back in a few minutes. She said, sit down there. Don't worry. This is all right. So I sat there, and I wasn't going to argue at that point. But anyway, we had a good conversation, and she did agree to come out and gave us a show. I don't remember what it was at this time, but I know at that time that was the fun of going down there. Now, here's a friend of mine, one of the boys, Pat Dean, who did a very nice, when our first reunion was held by him, Ruthie and I got it together, and he used to do work like Off does for the Inquirer. He did it for a new Louisiana paper. And this is a cartoon he meant, and it shows me going in with Bebe Daniels getting herself changed, and talks about Harry Blanck had a good time too in London. So anyway, that was...
Can we hold that so that you can get a good zoom on it to the camera?
All right, good.
You can see it on the monitor over there.
Good.
Yeah.
It's only one X.
Okay. There you are.
All right.
We got you covered.
Okay, fine. Okay. Now, we spent time in England, did some training, not as much as we probably should have, but then they sent us down to an area near Weymouth to prepare to go on the invasion. Not the initial invasion, but D+8 was our day. And at that time, before we went, they attached us to the 30th Infantry. Well, as it turned out, Hitler paid us a very dubious honor. Hitler said, the fanatical Roosevelt division, the SS division is 30th for the Americans. And he said it's the toughest division in Europe and so forth. And it was an honor coming from Hitler. And he said they have to be beaten at Malmedy. And Malmedy was in the Battle of the Bulge, just at that time. And as it turned out, the 1st SS did fight us, and we won that battle, no trouble. They were just eliminated. So anyway, all right, now, getting back to St. Lo. St. Lo was one of the real spots that was in Normandy. General Leslie McNair, the head of all the ground forces in the world, the ground forces, Leslie McNair. I was a liaison officer at this time, and I had the privilege of being with the general, and it got quite well. He got to know me, and to my face anyway. And so anyway, General Hobbs, his aide, who I became very friendly with, said, General Leslie McNair is coming over from Washington, and he wants to see this saturation bombing of St. Lo. I said, good. He said, well, come on down here. He said, he'll be here in a very short time. So I went down, and I was as close to Leslie McNair, this top man of the world ground forces, as I am to this gentleman here. And we stood there talking. I didn't talk. I just listened. And so the planes were coming over. You know, I used to see these things. It's a horrible sight, and you gentlemen, I'm sure, have seen it. but I've seen so many of those planes get hit as they're going across. The ACAT goes up and you'll just see an explosion or a wing come off or something, and then you'll count the parachutes that come out and hope they all come out. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But Leslie McNair wanted to see all this. He got in the Jeep with my friend, the aide, General's aide. They went to the front, which is maybe half a mile away, and the planes were coming over en masse. Well, I looked up, and the fellows around me looked up, and here's bombs coming down. I mean, all over the sky, bombs are coming down. What happened? They put a smoke screen up across the front line so that the Air Force would know where to bomb. The smoke screen drifted back in a straight line over our area. And the bombers came across, and so what did they do? They dropped the bombs on our men. There were 500 casualties that day in our division alone, just our division, 500 casualties. The Jeep came back. My friend was in it. The general wasn't. I said, "Where's the general?" He said, "Harry, you'll know in a very few minutes." And of course, he was killed there. I think it's in this book I have. It says McNair killed in Normandy. It was big headlines in the paper back home in the Enquirer. Well, that was a little piece of history I was with, a sad piece, but you were so close to these fellows that it was really something that really hit home. As far as the aide goes, my friend, I can't remember his name, the general did not drink. And I got very friendly with this other fellow. He was a captain also, and he and I would really get together, and he'd see that I got some of the general's liquor every week. And I always had enough liquor on hand. And but I did split it up with my men. I didn't drink it all myself, but anyway, so I was well supplied. And that was kind of interesting. All right, now, as I say, in Normandy, one night I was at a 40 millimeter gun position at the division, and I was talking to these fellows just about sunset. There was 4 of them, and I knew them. They were my men. They were showing me, this one fellow got a picture out of his girl back home, and he said, "You know, Captain," he said, "as soon as we get back, we're going to get married." And she was a very pretty girl. I do remember that. And the other fellows were talking about what they're going to do when they get back home. And I said, "That's wonderful." I said, "That's great." And they said, "Oh," he said, "we're looking forward to it." I had to leave division headquarters to go down to battalion, and I came back maybe 30 or 40 minutes later, and I saw something burning, and here it was this 40 millimeter gun. A bomber had come across, a German bomber, and dropped the bomb right on it. And I looked, and there's the 4 men still sitting there with the gun. And I cried that night. I cried sometimes in this war, and I cried that night. Here's 4 men that I was with only an hour ago, and they were happy and having fun, and here they are right there. And that's war, of course. As a sideline, there were 3 Pennsylvania officers in my outfit. Flanagan from Reading, Zarnigan from Scranton, Zarnigan from Reading, and myself. And I was the only one to come home. The other 2 are over there still. So I was lucky. I was lucky all through that war. One night while we were in Normandy, Germans come across with these bombs, big bombs, and they open up. And they have little scatter bombs about the size of a hand grenade, and they come down like rain wherever they're going to come down. I was there. I was in the slit trench. I had my equipment on the side, and one of them hit, and the next morning I measured it. My equipment was all full of shrapnel, and it wasn't more than about 10 inches to a foot away from the edge of my slit trench. And if it had been further over, I wouldn't be here today. A fellow sitting laying near me, maybe 8 or 10 feet away, one dropped right on him and it killed him. And so I was lucky there. I was lucky so often along this route. The good Lord had me set for something else. I don't know. I think I know what it was said. He held me for this another job. Okay. All right, now. Okay, now, as far as the liaison work goes, it was rather interesting. One night, I was at our headquarters, General Hobbs, and he gave me some stuff to take to the battalion, and it was maybe 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and I got a hold of Peters, my driver. He said, "Come on, Pete, we got to go." And you go along these little slit lights. You fellas know what it's like at nighttime. You don't have lights, you have a little slit light. We're going down this dirt road. I didn't know where the devil we were. I thought we were going in the right direction. But As I look, I can make out a man with his hands up in the air right in the middle of the road. It had a helmet on, a German helmet. And I said, Pete, I said, there's a German with his hands up. I said, we'll have to stop. It could have been an ambush very well. And afterwards, I was surprised it wasn't. But I got out of the Jeep and I went up to him, and he spoke enough English and I spoke enough German that he wanted to really surrender. His gun was laying down on the ground. And I said, okay. I said, you go sit in the hood of that Jeep there, and we'll take you into the battalion. And we took him in. I hate to say it, but some cases with infantry, they are in a hurry. They're more ready to get rid of the enemy rather than take them as prisoners. The surrender passes that they used to drop in Normandy, the Germans were told to pick them up, walk across no man's land, and they'd have safe conduct. I saw more than one German laying on the ground when we were advancing with a surrender pass clutching his hands, and he was dead, of course. And but then the Germans used to drop passes on us too, and I had some laying up here, some very interesting passes. They drop on us during the night. Okay, now so then we went on to Mortain. After we got through St. Lo area, we went on to Mortain, and Mortain was where the Germans were really going to break through. It looked as if they were. Again, the 30th Infantry was playing a key position. They were about ready to break through, and General Hobbs told all the men in the division headquarters, no man's leaving here. He said, we are not leaving here for any reason. And they issued more ammunition, and but in the meantime, the British Air Force came across and they helped us. The British Air Force really took care of us that day. They went back and forth strafing and bombing these troops that were advancing on us. And by the time the day was over, they had done their job, and it did not occur. So anyway, that is, let's see here. You know, when you go over these things, a friend of mine's been after me to write a book and put all this down in sequence and a lot more detail than I'm giving you right now, because mine was a little bit different than the infantrymen that were in the outfit I was in. They were down there doing the real dirty work and the real deadly work. And I think my friend here, Metro, was in that end of things. So, okay, now, we got into a place called Herzogenrath, right on the German border, the German and Dutch border. A little town called Herleen, Holland, was about 10 miles away, and Herzogenrath was right on the border. And we stayed there, sort of not too much going on. And about the 18th of December, I think it was around the 18th, suddenly we got word in that date area that the bulge was breaking through, and you could see it on the war map in the division. You could see a little bit of a bulge starting, and by the next night, the 30th Infantry was called upon to go down to Malmedy at the bulge and stop them from coming through where they were trying to break through. All night long, we got on the road that night, and all night long, and what I'm telling you fellas, some of you have been through, I'm sure, I know you have. All night long, we went along this road, bumper to bumper practically, with the guns and our jeeps and our trucks and everything else. And the Germans would come along and drop flares on us, and then the next plane would come along, machine guns. And we were in and out of those jeeps all night long, and they weren't too good at aiming, so we didn't have too much trouble. The next day we did arrive in the Malmedy area, and where the bulge was being fought. Our infantry, the 117th, went right into action, and the 120th was kept in reserve because they had been in so much action before, and they met the Germans right there at the Stavelo Malmedy area. Christmas Eve was rather interesting, and it was a Christmas Eve I'll never forget. At nighttime, the V-1 bombs would come across. They come across in the daytime too. V-1 bombs, as you gentlemen also know, were unmanned bombs, and they'd come across and they'd put, 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 as a regular put, put sound going through the air. When that put, put would stop, you fell on the floor because that meant the bomb was coming down. And that happened just continuously on Christmas Eve. And in between we did have time to play a little poker and roll some dice. And that is one of the breaks you got to do. You got to do these things once in a while. And I do believe we had a bottle of liquor sitting on the table. And so this was just a little break we had. But the next morning, the colonel loved to take me to the front lines. He would say, come on. He'd call me Blanck, and Colonel Mace was the nicest guy. He was like a father. He was the greatest guy in the world, really was. And he also loved Ruthie. That was his girl also. I could have lost Ruthie a few times during that war if I wanted to. But anyway, he was so nice about it, but he always wanted me to go to the front lines. So he said to me, he said, Harry, he said, look, he said, yesterday they bombed Malmedy by mistake. He said, a lot of wounded people down there. He said, I want you, the chaplain, and the medic to go down. Take the jeep and go down and see what you can do. And you get any wounded people, take them to the hospital on the hill. Sure enough, we got wounded people pretty quickly. The number of dead laying around the ground down there. And so they took the jeep and they took what they could, 3 or 4 people in the jeep up. They had them laying there and up on the hill in this hospital. And I walked across this big courtyard or the areaway or whatever you want to call it. And I was crossing over, and there was a little Russian girl there. And you know, it's funny, as a soldier, you kind of stop and talk to these girls. She was a very pretty Russian girl. Her name was Tanya. And so I was talking to her, and the bombers were coming across. The darn bombers are always coming across. And suddenly she looked up and she grabbed my arm like that in a death grip. And I looked up, and here's nothing but specks coming down on us. I had more problems with getting in bombing situations, and they were coming right down on us. And so I tried to knock her down. Finally I had to really hit her, make her fall down. And I fell on the ground beside her, and the whole ground was shaking, and bombs were going off all around us. Luckily, one more time, none hit myself, or her anyway in that case. But after it was over, I went around helping people, and I really had to help. I had one gentleman come over to me, a German fella, and he's crying, and he said, mein Knabe, mein Knabe. And he asked for me to come. He took my hand. I went over, and here's a little boy, maybe 14 years old. And this was Christmas Day, remember, and this little boy was not with it anymore. The children were out playing. War is a funny thing. The front line was more than a mile away, and the children were out playing. And this one person, a woman, I guess she was about 23 or 24 years old, and she was dressed very nice, but she was laying there, and 2 little children laying beside her. They were all both done. And I had one woman, she was about, and before I used to say an old woman, but since I live at Rydell Park, nobody's old, everybody's old. And so I took her in her arms, and she looked at me, and she started to say something to me, and her head went back, and she was dead. I realized she was dead. I just took her to cradle to take her off the cement, and I laid her down, and then we kept taking people up to the hospital all that day, and it was a terrible Christmas Day. I'll never forget it. There was Christmas trees that were just torn apart. They've been hit by these bombs and everything else. But Christmas doesn't, I have to admit, it doesn't mean too much to me sometimes anymore. Now below Malmedy is a town by the name of Stavelot, maybe 8 or 10 miles toward the area where McAuliffe and his group gave the Germans the ultimatum nuts. And the Germans didn't know what it meant. They had to get an interpreter to find out what nuts meant when he was asked to surrender. And so in between, it was Stavelot. Well, at Stavelot, the colonel got a hold of me again. He said, Harry, there's a massacre down at Stavelot, and he said, I want to see some of these machine gun nests down there. I said, well, we don't have to see the machine gun nests, do we, Colonel? Yeah, we do. Come on with me. So you go, and the general, you know, I think he wanted to get rid of me, but anyway, he wasn't lucky. But so we went down to Stavelot, but I have pictures in the album. There's pictures there of the 27 women and children were there, laying there. Not a man among them, laying there piled on top of each other, all machine gunned. And one little boy, he was probably about 4 or 5 years old. They had blonde-haired kids. He got up and ran apparently, and one of these SS creeps went over and knocked him down and smashed his head in. And these pictures appeared back in the Inquirer on the front page in those days. In fact, I have copies of those here, and I have a copy of the originals I took. And but it was a terrible thing, honestly, to think of all these young women and children there for no darn reason at all. And the SS was right across the river. Where we were, they weren't more than 50 yards away, right across this little river. The colonel said, come on. He said, there's a machine gun nest up in this building. He said, we're going up and look at it. So I went up, I took a picture of it. There's a picture in there of it. And this machine gunner's pointing out where the Germans are. He said, there's some right over these. I'm going to get those so-and-sos. And so we finally got out of there alive, but some more came in later to help relieve this fella, and they were killed entering the building we got out of. So anyway, but that was Stavelot, and the bulge went on for a while, and as you fellas know, and all right, now okay, so as far as this situation that the Malmedy and so forth goes, we did hold them there, and that was a very serious situation because if we hadn't held them, they could have come through and they cut off McAuliffe down at the other end, and they'd go right on through to Antwerp, and that's what they're aiming for. And the 30th Infantry was credited with saving them. I have a letter here where we were rated #1 out of all the infantry divisions in Europe. There was 80-some divisions, and we were rated the top divisions after the war was over. France rated us the top one. France gave us a Legion of Honor, and I didn't send away for the medal or go for it, but my friends got the medal. We just had to send over there, and they sent it to us. And so I was very proud of the job that the 30th did. Back to General Hobbs one night back in, going all the way back to Normandy, I was in his headquarters, and he gave me some information how to get to the battalion in a hurry. This might have been 2 o'clock in the morning, and I started to go out, and a fellow came running in, an officer came running in, and he ran over to the general. And next thing I know, the general called me. He said, "Hey, Blanck, come back here." I said, "Why?" He said, "Come back here." He said, "You're not going anyplace tonight." He said, "We can't get out." He said, "We're surrounded right now." He said, "As soon as we break the area that's surrounded," he said, "I'll let you know and you can go on your way." But he said, so he just caught me that night because another minute I'd have been out that door and right in that night. All right, now, as far as nice things go, we started to go through Germany and the war was getting near the end. We came across a spot. My Peterson, my driver, were just driving along without anything special at that moment. And there's some beautiful fields over there of corn or what have you and so forth. And there's a German standing alongside the road, and he's pointing down this little dirt road. And I said, "Peterson," I said, "let's see what it is." And so we turned and went back the dirt road. And as we started back the dirt road, we could see Germans coming toward us with their hands up. So it's just he and I, and these Germans are all marching out with their hands up, no guns, and they're surrendering. And we get back maybe a half a mile, and here's a group of American prisoners, and we were the first one to get there. And if you don't think that was one of the happiest days of my life, because they just threw their arms around us, and they were crying, and they said, "My God, we're so happy to see you." I said, "Look, guys," I said, "there's stuff in that Jeep, take it all." I said, "I got some liquor in there, I got some cigarettes, everything. Take whatever you want." And boy, they went over and they had a ball. And but that was a terribly great thing and a wonderful thing. And after we were there a short while, some others came through, and another one or two groups of men came back, and they probably took them away. We went on our way then, but it was a very nice thing, a great thing. Another thing, we were going along, and we had a habit of running into people that were pointing down at something. And we went along, and we're just Peterson and I again, and this fellow's pointing down the hill like that, a German. And I said, "Stop, Peterson, we'll find out what it is." So we looked down, and here's a freight train there without an engine. And this freight train had about 5 cars on it, just sitting there. He and I went down, and here's what it was. It was full of Jewish refugees, heading for some camp to be eliminated. And so I'll tell you, at first when we started opening the doors up of the freight cars, we couldn't get them from inside, and there was a number of them. I have a couple of pictures of that in the album also, and there was a number of them were being pulled out that were already dead from the heat and what have you, and probably not eating. But by that time, there was a number of other soldiers or infantrymen or whatever they were, came down and helped us. And but they were probably heading for some place. What probably happened, the engineer knew that we were coming, and he wanted to get out of there, so he just cut the train off and left the freight cars. So I'm glad we got there and pulled them out. I also visited Buchenwald. I visited Buchenwald after that, or just before that, and Buchenwald was another concentration camp, and I got a picture of one of the inmates there, and he told me how they used to torture them and what have you and so forth. Pretty horrible things that they did to them. And then there's one spot there, they just throw them into a pit. He'd say they throw them in that pit, and then they dig them up, carry them out later and take them to the crematory and what have you. The war is almost over, and Roosevelt said we're going to go into Berlin, and General Hobbs was quite happy because we're at the Elbe River, and all we had to do is cross there and go about 30, 40 miles, and we would have been in Berlin. And you could see Berlin burning at night from our bombers still dropping bombs on them. But, however, the Russians decided they wanted Berlin, and Roosevelt caved in, and we got about 10 miles, maybe 20 miles from Berlin, and we had to turn our whole operation, our whole line of trucks around, guns around, everything else around, and go back across the Elbe River. The Russians took it over, and we weren't happy about that. Well, anyway, what happened then, I was given the assignment, boy, when I go to move my legs, you well better catch me. Okay? Oh, boy. Oh, jeez. My gosh, excuse me. I'm really all right. But I just want to show you what a veteran looks like. But, talking about a veteran, this lady was walking down the street, and she looked up in this house on a little rise, a hill. And she saw this old man rocking back and forth. Are you all right, veteran? Thank you for catching me. She saw this old man rocking back and forth with a smile on his face. She said, I've got to talk to that gentleman. See, he looks so happy, and his old man, he's smiling and looks so content. She went up on the porch, and she said to the gentleman, she said, tell me, sir, she said, you look so content, you're so happy. She said, why? He said, well, lady, I drink a quart of whiskey every day. And he said, I smoke a carton of cigarettes every 2 days, and I eat the worst food that's possible to eat. Oh, she said, my Lord. She said, that's amazing. He said, she said, that's amazing. And she said, tell me something. How old are you? He said, I'm 26 years old. But anyway, now, all right, now we met the Russians at the Elbe River, and we did a little fighting with them. They kept shooting across at night or in the daytime, and they got a little vodka in them, but we didn't have any men killed, but they did do a little firing at their convenience. But after that, they decided they needed mayors to be in these little towns nearby. So they appointed me a mayor of a town. Well, this is rather interesting. Every time I see Mayor Street, I realize how easy it is. And so I got in there, and I got the mayor's office, and they gave me a secretary who was the mayor's secretary. I don't know where the mayor got to. He must have skipped out. And
You were Burgermeister.
Yeah.
Right, you're right. That's true. You know how much I know about it. But anyway, they were outside of town, maybe a couple miles, was a Russian displaced person camp. These weren't soldiers altogether. This was a lot of families and so forth. And there must have been several thousand. It was a big camp surrounded by barbed wire. And I had to take care of feeding those people and getting them food and so forth. And I'd go down to that camp in the morning, and every time I go down, they'd want a little more milk for their kids or a little more of this for themselves or something. And this secretary that I had, she said, Captain, she said, they're going to kill you when you go in there. I said, watch out, they'll kill you. And when I would go into that kitchen and see these big Russians with these cleavers, great big strong guys, you know, I thought, boy, I'm going to get out of here anyway. So anyway, we go down there and I took care of that. But in the meantime, one morning I'm going along. These are not the nice things in war, but this is what happens. One morning I'm going along in this road right outside the camp, and again, somebody's pointing down the hill. They're always pointing. They never point at me, but they pointed down the hill. And in this little ditch was a boy, maybe 15 years old, with his throat cut ear to ear. And he's saying, Rusky. Well, the Rusky get out of those barbed wire areas and got through there and did it. One night, the next morning they called me. Since I was the mayor of the town, I had to go down, and here was a whole family was wiped out by the Russians. Everybody in the house was eliminated. Another thing they had in this town were two mines, a mine that held gold and a mine that held the Africa core. So I decided I had to go down. I should go down. As a mayor, I thought I should. And I got in this old cage, and I mean an old cage. And I went down a couple thousand feet. It was a rather deep mine. And got down to the bottom. We got in this rickety old car, and a couple of these Germans were with me, and if they wanted to get rid of me, they could have done it then. But we went back into this one area, and here's some cages here, a couple of cages, and he opens these cages up, and inside were bars of gold. I mean, really beautiful gold, bars of it, and bars of platinum. And this was all back in the paper at home, too. These things were all reported as soon as I got in, and they had experts come and sign it up and count how many bars of gold there were. Quite a few $1 million worth of each. The gold you couldn't steal. If I wanted to steal the platinum, you could have probably, but I wasn't that type of mood, and I'm not that type. The other mine was another place that had an immense room in it, and it was for the Africa Corps. And there was piled high with these helmets and Africa Corps and so forth. I don't know when they would have ever used it. But that was rather interesting and unusual to go down in those mines. And I was always glad to get out of them, but it was an experience. And I can feel for these fellows out in western Pennsylvania that were stuck down there because it's pretty bad. Okay, now, so after that, I was finished being a mayor, and they said to us, let's go down to Marseille. And so we hadn't been through enough war. Our battalion, the 531st, we shot down 44 and a half planes, a half shot, 44 we shot down actually. I think we damaged 47 or something others, and on the ground we killed quite a few Germans. We had a good record, the battalion, and aside from the infantry in front of us. But we headed on down to Marseille, and we got down there, and we had a little time off. I went over to the place right above Monaco there. I didn't get into Monaco. And then also I got a chance to go up to Paris, and they put me on this train express, a real fancy express. And I stayed up there for 3 days and got around to the cathedral and only partway up at that time, up the Eiffel Tower. But I just, on the way up on the train, I had a beautiful room, and this, I don't know whether Russian or Bulgarian or what the deuce he was, he came in and decided he wanted half my room. And I wasn't going to argue with him, so he had half the room and I had the other half, which is all right. And, but that was a break. We were all set to go on to Japan. And we were apparently really going to be part of the invasion force because we'd had the experience, had all that fighting. And 2 days before we were going to get on this ship that was sitting there in the harbor in Marseille, the bomb was dropped by Truman. And I think that was the greatest thing he ever did. He saved thousands of lives there, thousands of them. He killed thousands of Japs, but they were the enemy, unfortunately. They were not our doing. But he really did save us, and after that, was able to think about coming home, and finally went on up to Antwerp and got on the Rensselaer Victory and came home. And back to Indiantown Gap is where I pulled in. And I came home, and that's pretty much the story. There's a lot more to it than that, but I've cut it short. It's just a matter of time. And I came home and I became a stockbroker, and I should have stayed over there. But anyway, now as far as a stockbroker goes, though, really, seriously, I was 27 years as a broker and an analyst, and I had a good job, and I'd made a lot of money from my customers. I honestly did, really, because I didn't go into any of these high flyers. I stayed in paper stocks, bank stocks, and food stocks, and that's what I'm in today. And the food stocks right now are really starting to move up again, and that's what I did, only the good stocks. And customers of mine that held on to them, I made several millionaires, and I was quite proud of it. But anyway, I retired when I was 62. I'm 85 now, as you know. You think I'm 95 when I fell in Metro there. But anyway, I managed to retire at 62. The good Lord gave me enough money, and I thought, I can't take it all with me. Ruth and I retired, and ever since then, all the years since then, we have volunteered. And I've been a volunteer bartender, I've been this, I've been that, Norristown State Hospital, and so forth. And we've had a very productive and good life. Unfortunately, on the sad side, Ruthie developed Parkinson's disease about 6 years ago, and she's not in good shape now, and that's why we're in Rydell Park, and that's a sad way. But we've been married 63 years, and we had a great 63 years, a lot of traveling and so forth. So that's a little bit of the happier time. Somebody say something. Did you say? Okay, all right. Well, listen, hey, fellas, thank you for... Look, it's a... Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Don.
Thanks for a good show.
Well, I'm glad that Metro was sitting there, right? Boy, you know, my legs are gone. I shouldn't. Yeah, I should.
Where was Ruthie when you boarded the ship to come home?
She was with her sister-in-law.
Back to the States?
Oh, yeah. You know something, what I did, though, really, something interesting. I used to gamble, and I was very lucky at dice. I could roll dice, and I'd win 9 times out of 10. And I sent her over $5,000 home. Ruthie put every bit of it in the bank. Every single dollar. When I came home, it was all in the bank. And that was a nice start. And but today, when I haven't been down to the casinos for 12 years. I went down about 2 months ago, and I was going to not play at all, but I went by a blackjack table, and there was a seat empty. The seat had some kind of sound system, and it said, Harry, come over here and sit down. And, you know, I thought, my gosh, this is amazing. I went over and sat down, but damn it, I did lose. Anyway, that's the story. There's another story about a fellow out fishing in Loch Lomond, the Scotch lake in Scotland. He's very happily fishing, and he's an atheist. He doesn't believe in anything. He's an atheist. Suddenly, the Loch Ness Monster comes up out of the water, throws his boat and himself high in the sky, and he says, oh, my God, help me. He's frozen right there in the sky. The Lord booms out in a voice, says, 2 minutes ago, you didn't believe in me. He said, 2 minutes ago, I didn't believe in the Loch Ness Monster either.
Story on this Nazi flag.
Oh, the Nazi flag. That Nazi flag I got from Fort Evening-Mal. Now, Fort Evening-Mal was on the way through Belgium, the Holland border. And the Germans, the fort was never used because it was facing the wrong way, and the Germans just surrounded it from the back. The Belgian people couldn't use it as defense. The Germans didn't even try to defend it, but they had a couple of these flags in there, and I did go in, and one of the flags I sold for $50, and I bet today I could get $500 for it. But however, that was, okay, that's it, you've got it.
Okay, well,
Again, thank you. Well, listen, one last story. This little boy was his mother down the corner grocery store for a loaf of raisin bread. So he got the raisin bread and brought it back, and his mother found a fly in the raisin bread. She said, you go back and tell that grocer there's a fly in this raisin bread. He went back and told the grocer. The grocer said, look, he said, you bring the fly back to me, and I'll give you a raisin. All
right. Well, before we go I think we have plenty of time for a few more questions and answers. But before we get into the questions and answers, we have a special presentation to make to Major General Foster, who is here telling us about his work with the Comanche Indians. And Bob Fishback has a little story to tell about that. And as soon as he's ready, I'll hand the mic over to him.
Good afternoon. I'm Robert Fishback. I'm here on behalf of Senator Stuart Greenleaf and Senator Joe Conte, whom you may or may not know. Hopefully you do know them. And they arranged for a return of our March 2002 Speaker, General Hugh Foster Jr., who is a retired general, has a career that spans 34 years in the military, and he began as the commander of a very unusual unit, the Code Talkers, and they created, in the Comanche language, a code which was never broken. The Axis powers tried often to decipher the code, and they were unable to do so. He was a newly minted second lieutenant from West Point, and he had never met a Native American before this assignment, and he handled it with great ease. I'm going to read a few excerpts from the citation. General Foster has such an amazing career. We'll just summarize that he graduated in June 41, commissioned second lieutenant in the Signal Corps, and he trained 17 Comanche Indians to be code talkers. He's the only surviving non-Native American to have actually participated in the development of American Indian spoken codes for military use. And this code, as I said, was never broken. Let me quote some excerpts from the Senate citation and then introduce a familiar face to most of us, and that would be General Foster. This is from the Senate of Pennsylvania. Congratulations in the Senate. Whereas the Senate of Pennsylvania is extremely proud to recognize those extraordinary citizens who, through service to their country, have upheld the principles and ideals upon which this nation was founded. Whereas Major General Hugh Foster Jr., who is retired from the United States Army, who is being honored for his outstanding contributions to military intelligence efforts through his development of a code which were used by the Comanche Native Americans during World War II. Here's our citation. Whereas General Foster worked with Comanche members of the United States Army who were recruited to create a military code using their native language. The code, which he helped develop, cloaked American military messages on the battlefields of Europe and was never broken during World War II. The code played a significant role in the liberation of Europe, saved thousands of American and Allied lives, and was key to the United States and Allied forces' success during World War II. Now, therefore, the Senate of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and of course we too, pay a respectful tribute to Major General Hugh Foster Jr. for his dedicated and distinguished service to this nation. Notes with pride his valiant actions, unswerving commitment to duty and exemplary leadership ability, expresses gratitude for his outstanding contributions to the cause of peace and freedom in this country and throughout the world, and directs that a copy of this document, sponsored by Senator Joe Conte and behind-the-scenes Senator Stu Greenleaf, be transmitted to Major General Hugh Foster Jr. of Furlong, Pennsylvania. would you please come up and accept this citation from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania? Would you be able to say a few words about the recent visit you had to Oklahoma?
I'd be delighted. I just got back from Oklahoma last week. Oklahoma is where the Comanche Indians come from. Now, I can assure you there are a few challenges more daunting than being a second lieutenant with 2 months on active duty and being ordered to train people to do something that you don't know how to do yourself. We had 17 Comanche Indians. They all spoke English. They had all been schooled in a federal government school on the Indian reservation where they had been forbidden to speak Comanche. If anyone caught them speaking Comanche, they were punished. And then all of a sudden, the Army says, please, would you come speak Comanche for us? The problem was that my instructions were very simple. Lieutenant Foster, we got 17 Comanche Indians trained to be code talkers. Any questions? Well, there's 3 things a second lieutenant, a new second lieutenant knows. Yes, sir, no, sir, and I don't know, sir, but I'll find out. So this was a no, sir type thing. As I started to leave the office, the colonel called me back. He says, when on the second, Foster? No other Comanche must be able to understand this. Only these 17. Oh, of course, sir. I met with the Comanches in a training room, and I asked them, I said, there's going to be a lot of military terms which you're going to have to transmit over the telephone or over the radio in a manner that the Germans can't understand and that nobody except you 17 will be able to understand. So let's just see how much of a problem we have. What's the Comanche word for airplane? And they said, Hutsu. I said, all right. Now, what do you call a bomber? Hutsu. What do you call a fighter? Hutsu. What do you call a reconnaissance plane? Hutsu. What do you call an attack plane? Hutsu. I said, this is not going to work. So after a few other things, I explained that we'll meet tomorrow afternoon and we'll go through this and figure out how we're going to handle it. So that night, I made up a list of about 150 military terms that they were going to have to transmit in a code of some sort. Obviously, one of the things they would have to do would be to spell place names, because they were going to a foreign country. They'd have to spell the rivers and names of rivers and streets and buildings and towns and people and so on. So we met the next afternoon, and I said, all right, now let's take the first problem. What are you going to call a bomber? So they gathered in the back of the room and chatted amongst themselves in Comanche for a couple of minutes, and then they started laughing uproariously. And when they calmed down, they came to me, and I had a little green pocket notebook. Now, there is no written Comanche language, hence no Comanche alphabet. So I said, I just wrote the name word bomber in my book, and then in phonetics wrote what they told me. And what they told me was Boa Hutsu. So I wrote Boa Hutsu, and they all laughed uproariously. And I said, all right, what's so funny about that? What does Boa Hutsu mean? It means pregnant airplane. Eventually, we worked our way through the different types of airplanes. We got down to different types of guns. I said, what are we going to call a machine gun? They chatted together for a while and said, Kutsakana Tawi. So I put that in the next, Kutsakana Tawi. And I said, I knew that Tawi meant gun. I said, what does Kutsakana mean? That means sewing machine. I said, where does that come from? Well, back on the reservation, Grandma had the old treadle sewing machines. And when you worked the treadle sewing machine, it was Kutsakana, Kutsakana. So eventually we got down to tank. I said, what are we going to call a tank? And they thought for a while, and they told me, Wakare. So I wrote Wakare. And what does that mean? That means turtle. Well, why a turtle? Well, a turtle has a hard shell and moves around, just like a tank. And you can see the connection there. By pure coincidence, a year after I was teaching these Comanches, or they were teaching me, depending upon your point of view, the Marine Corps started with their Navajo Indians. And the Navajo Indians chose their word for turtle to mean tank also. So pure coincidence. I wound up overseas a year before the Comanches did in a different organization. I was in Northwest Africa and Italy for 27 months, 2 days, 8 hours, 36 minutes, approximately. But the Comanches were a great gang, and when it came to spelling, for instance, they came up with a scheme. And I'll cut this short because I know you have a program that you're trying to get through here. But what they did was say that if you want to let's take the word bridge, which has 6 letters. For the B, think of any word in English that begins with a B and say that word in Comanche. And, of course, each time they needed a B, they'd think of a different word. Boy, bought, bow, boat, bring, whatever. So that the probability of the same word meaning the same thing for the Germans or anyone else listening to this was practically 0. So I worked out, just for my own information, if we use 5 words in English for B and 5 different words for R and I, D, G, E, and followed that system, there are 15,625 different ways to spell bridge. And this is all being said in Comanche. So it worked pretty well. It was never broken. The code was never broken. And I just got back from Oklahoma. There's only one of these Comanche code talkers still living. All the others have died. And they just had a big powwow for the descendants of the Comanche code talkers. Now you understand that it was classified until 1968. And so their descendants had no idea what the code talkers had been doing. A little bit, but not much. So I gave them a talk about 3 times as long as I'm talking to you right now, and explained to them what their husbands and fathers and so on had been, how they'd been trained, and what they had done. And they were very appreciative. This is the first time that they'd found out what was going on in the war as far as their relatives were concerned. And I think I'd best let somebody else take this on from now.
Thank you very much, General Foster, and thank you for reappearing before our World War II lecture series. Are these some of the men that you commanded?
They are indeed.
All right, I have a picture and I have the citation, and I want to thank you very much for your service to our country. Oh, yes, and the folder. Okay. And thank you, Don Lee, for working hand in glove with me for and numerous phone calls, and I hope I didn't annoy you every time I called. Just once in a while. Okay. I'll turn the program back to you. Thank you, General Foster. Now, if someone wanted to take a picture? Okay.
Okay. Harry, come in. I only got one picture. Okay, Harry.
Really?
Get in too. You're over on the side there.
How come?
Let me turn sideways to be a little skinnier.
All right.
What is skinny? What's the Comanche word for skinny?
I have no idea. I'll tell you one thing, it's hard to converse when the only words you know are nouns. No verbs, no adjectives.
Yeah. Okay.
Just hold this up so people can see it.
All right.
General?
Early to hear what you're talking about.
Yeah, good. I'm good. Okay. We're very happy. You're one of our men.
My thanks to you and to all the folks who kept the listening.
And now we still have a little time if any of you have some questions or if any of you have any funny stories you want to tell. We had a few. Bob, how about taking this so that we can all hear it?
Hi, Don, thank you. Okay, General Foster, sure. General Foster, sir. This is the first time I've been enlightened that that a Comanche or Indian code talk was used in the European theater. I had only realized that that the Navajos had, of course, as a result of the Wind Talker motion picture and so on, had worked out in the Pacific. But just for your information, sir. So.
The Comanches were in the 4th Infantry Division.
Okay, thank you.
Let's put it on tape.
The Comanches were in the 4th Infantry Division. Now, Indians were used as code talkers in World War I. A company commander who was in dire straits happened to walk past a group of Indians, about 4 or 5 of them, who were chatting in their native tongue. And it occurred to him that, gee whiz, maybe this will help me. And so they were used very selectively in that small unit. In World War II, the Army decided to try and capitalize on that. After World War I, the Germans sent some, quote, archaeologists to America to study Indian arrowheads and so on. But in the meantime, learn all their native languages. And the Army found out that these were really not archaeologists. These were linguists with a little quick, get-rich-quick archaeology training. And they were all, the State Department was notified, and they were all shipped back to the States, back to Germany and other places. But the Comanches, as I say, I did not serve in combat with the Comanches because I was sent to North Africa a year before they went overseas. But I've had good reports from them. And they were the ones that contacted me after the war. In fact, in 1989, I received a telephone call from one of them. They remembered me all that time, from 1941 to 1989. So apparently I made a deep impression on them. And they called me, they went to their local congressional representative and said, find Foster. So that wasn't too hard to do. They went to the West Point graduates list and found me. And the Comanche Indians told me that they were being honored by the French government at the state capitol in November of 1989, I guess it was. And they wanted me there with them, which I thought was really a very nice thing. I guess heartwarming is the sort of thing that fits in that phrase. So I went out there in civilian clothes and froze my tush on the front steps of the Capitol at Tulsa, while the Comanches and other Indians ran around, attired mostly in feathers and bare skin, did their war dances and so on. And after the ceremony was over, my co-talkers called me aside and said, "Why are you not in uniform?" And I said, "Well, I didn't know what I was getting into." They said, "Well, we're going to have you back here several times. Be in uniform every time." So they're talking to a two-star general now. They're all PFCs, but generals know when to obey the orders. And so, courtesy of some very creative tailoring, I was able to get back into my uniform. And I've been out there 6 or 8 times. And the traditional Indian or Comanche way of showing their appreciation is to give you a blanket, an Indian blanket. And on this last trip that I made out there, I came home. I had to find an extra carton to take the comforter and 3 blankets that they gave me, plus a fan of bird feathers that you use during the war dance to blow the flies away and so on. And they're overly generous, but they do give these away, and I have quite a collection of Indian blankets. I've been out there about 6 or 8 times. My wife went with me several times, and I have been formally adopted by one of the Comanche code talkers, now deceased. And they gave me a Comanche name. I'll get to you in just a moment, sir. And for your information, I am Puiwitekwa Exabana. Puiwitekwa Exabana. Now that goes back to the old days when the American cavalry were fighting the Comanches. On the battlefield, officers wore red sashes so they could be identified in the smoke and the dust and everything else, and the soldiers would know who to take orders from and who to tell to get lost. So the officers wore red sashes. I was a signal corps officer, so red sash took care of the officer part, but there had to be some way of any signal corps communications. Telephone. Okay, telephone. So I'm telephone red sash. Puiwitekwa Exabana. And the couple of things you want to remember if you ever get traveling in Oklahoma, if you're seeking directions or so on from a Comanche Indian, be sure you understand the difference between Pui Pui Upai Abi and Pui Pui Tukak Abi. Because Pui Pui Upai Abi is an overpass, and Pui Pui Tukak Abi is an underpass. See? And there is a difference. Now, you had a question, sir. Hey, ESP. Okay. Well, you want to take the night out? Anybody else got any more questions? A house is a kani, and it's used in a connective form. A railroad is a puiwi tekwa, or a kunawagan. So a railroad station is a kunawagan kani. A hospital is a natsu kani, the place for sick. You have a question, sir?
Yes, General, the last time I heard your talk, I believe the remaining Comanche was not honored congressionally as the Navajos were.
That is correct. It's in the process. I wrote to the senators from Oklahoma, and in politer terms said, where the hell were you guys when this was all going on? And they didn't answer the letter. So I wrote a second letter and said, don't you open your mail? And explained to them that what an injustice it was to the Comanches, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Finally, a congresswoman in Texas picked up the thing, and she started it in the House, and I stirred the pot enough in the Senate to get one of the senators from Oklahoma to introduce a bill, which has been passed, I understand. But now they got to get the two versions together, you know, and it'll be the next Congress, I guess. But they have a bill that has been passed by the Senate to award the gold medal to Charles Charbiddy, the only surviving code talker. Now, it's interesting to note that the Congressional Medal of Honor, which is awarded to the military, is actually made out of brass and costs $30. The Congressional Medal, which they give to artists, newspaper guys and so on, is real gold and costs $30,000. You can see where our priorities go.
Could I chime in with something on that, please? Thank you. I also contacted Senator Joe Hoffel, who represents Montgomery County and other areas, and he also, this summer, wrote back saying that he was working on this same principle. And I'm glad you raised that question, because maybe we need to get up a petition and get that presented to our two senators and whoever your congressman is, and get this thing moving before, I mean, this man is 81 years old in Oklahoma. We can't wait indefinitely. So let's, I'll work on something just as I worked on the Senate citation, and we'll see what we can do out of this group. And I want to thank you very much for asking these very good questions.
Yeah.
Thank you. Incidentally, I'm 84, and next March I'll be 85. So.
Well, General,
Okay.
I'm 1 year ahead of you, General.
Oh yeah, hey, and stay that way.
85, you saw me fall over, didn't you?
No,
Didn't
no,
you see me fall?
no. Would you do it again for me?
Yeah, right here. I get a medal for that, you know. You get a medal.
Well, you and I served in different parts of the war.
Yeah, Normandy, we had all the battle stars of Europe.
Yeah.
Normandy and the Bulge and Mortain.
Yeah. I was assigned in Italy at the Corps level, Corps headquarters. Now, for those of you not familiar with the military, a Corps is a tactical headquarters. It has no logistical major responsibilities, and it has assigned to it various numbers of divisions, anywhere from 1 to 3 or 4, depending upon what the job is. And the thing that I didn't learn until after I was assigned to it was that it is an ideal place to be. Quoting one of my compatriots, Corps is too far forward to have to wear neckties and too far back to get shot. And that suits me fine. I had some very close calls, about 12 of them, and I figured that it was a good Lord keeping me alive, but he did. And I came back with all my working parts.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now let's have Harry.
Yeah, you're okay. All right. Okay. Now, fellas and girls, I do want to say one thing. I spoke before a group of children. I speak before children, too. And last week I was at a retirement home giving this talk. But these children are about 9 or 10, 11 years old. When I got finished, I didn't think they'd ask any questions at all. I said, tell me, guys and girls, do you have any questions? I think almost all hands went up. And this one kid, a young fella, I shouldn't call him a kid, a young boy, I said, what's your question, son? He said, did you ever change your underwear? I felt like saying there were times when they were shelling us or bombing or shooting at us. I could have, but anyway, you know, in the war, the general, the infantrymen, and I did occasionally, get shakes. You've heard of shakes. Some of you gentlemen had them. Your body shakes and you can't make it stop. And not that you're afraid you're still going to go ahead and get killed or whatever you have to do. You're going to do your duty, but your body shakes. And so that's one thing that does happen when you're in it, right? You know, don't you? This gentleman here was a Marine, and we let him in today, but he has to get a new set of papers, right? Tell me, fellas and girls, are there any questions? Anybody here from the 30th Infantry while I did all this talking about them? No? Any questions? Let's see. This thief was going through the neighborhood breaking into houses. So he broke into this one house, and he went into the living room and started picking up some beautiful artifacts and figurines and so forth. And he heard a voice saying, Jesus is watching. He looks around, he doesn't see anything. So he goes into the dining room, gets the silverware, and he hears the voice say again, Jesus is watching. So he looks around, there's nothing there. He goes upstairs and gets the jewelry out of this one room, puts it in his bag. His voice says, Jesus is watching. He goes in the next room, there's a great big hound dog laying there, and just looking at him, not doing anything. And the next thing you hear is, sick him, Jesus.
I spoke in front of 8th graders last week.
How did you?
One of our veterans was wounded. And of course, when you're wounded, you get the Purple Heart.
Right.
So I asked the class, you know what the Purple Heart signifies? The boy raised his hand. Yeah, they collect old clothes.
That's a cute one, too. That's a good one.
I'm a member of the Battle of the Bulge, and one of our members went to a librarian and says, where is books on... Where is the...
Yeah, take it, sure, okay. Sure.
One of our members, I'm a member of the Battle of the Bulge, I was in the Ardennes, and one of our members went to a librarian and asks, where are the books on the Battle of the Bulge? He says, over there with the diet section.
Good. That's all right. Okay, any other jokes? Maybe we'll tell jokes instead. Might as well laugh, okay? It's a good way to leave it. You know, when I was a salesman, when I first came out of the Army, I sold for a food concern, and I always left them laughing. They didn't get me an order, but I got them laughing. So that's what I believe in doing to customers. Leave them laughing.
Harry?
Yes.
We got equal time over. We got equal time to the general over here.
Oh.
We have a spy in our midst. I'm scheduled to speak to the veterans of the Battle of the Bulge, and one of them is here. So if I don't say the same thing then that I said now, they're going to know about it, and I'll be hauled up. Now, I want you to be sure that you had heard about little 6-year-old Timmy, whose grandmother was visiting, and the next morning, Timmy got up and played very quietly until he heard Grandma moving around, and then he went over and knocked on the door and says, Grandma, would you like some coffee? She says, Timmy, that would be great. So Timmy goes out in the kitchen and fumbles around and fixes up a tray with a mug of coffee, a sugar bowl, cream pitcher, teaspoon, and napkin, just like Mommy would, carries it in, knocks on the door. Grandma opens the door, looks at it, and says, Timmy, that looks great. Why don't you come in and we'll chat while I have my coffee? Great. So Timmy goes in and sits on the edge of the bed. Grandma puts the sugar and cream in the cup, starts to stir it, and feels a lump in the cup. Fishes it out. It's a little plastic soldier. So she says nothing and puts it on the tray, stirs some more, finds another one. Says, Timmy, what's the meaning of this? He says, well, the man on TV this morning said the best part of waking up is soldiers in your cup. So later that morning, Timmy and his parents and Grandma were in the sitting room talking about various and sundry things, and in a quiet moment, Timmy says, Grandma, how old are you? And she says, Timmy, you never ask a lady how old she is. That's not polite. And Timmy says, oh. Grandma, how much do you weigh? She says, Timmy, you never ask a lady how much she weighs. It's not polite. He says, oh. So after a few minutes, Timmy gets up and disappears. Comes back about 10 minutes later. And in another silent moment, he says, Timmy, he says, Grandma, you're 71 years old and you weigh 168 pounds. She says, where did you figure that out? He says, I looked at your driver's license. Furthermore, you were not a very good student. He says, Timmy, I was an excellent student all through school, always. Whatever gave you the idea that I was not an excellent student? But right on your driver's license, you got an F in sex.
So long, General. Very nice meeting you.
Hey, Harry. I have a comment for you and also one for General Foster. You were talking about this German flag you got at Abington, that fort in Belgium.
Yeah.
Did you know, or did the folks here know, that the German glider troops took that in 1940 with a small group of soldiers, and they took the entire fort? I think there's over 400 Belgian soldiers there, and they all gave up. Did you know that?
I did not know it. No,
Yeah, that was the first. I believe that was the first action of the German glider troops of the Second World War.
I didn't.
Now, General Foster.
Yes, sir.
Basic training, I was at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. That's Comanche country.
That sure is.
And I was there in the summer and fall of 1943. And over Christmas, 2 of us got a pass to go to Oklahoma City, just a 2-day pass. And in those days, the trains down there in Oklahoma were those old wooden cars with those woven seats, you know, those, I don't know what you call them. Rattan, yes. And so Larry and I were sitting in the train, and right in front of us was an Indian and his wife, or his frau, what do you call it, the squaw. And we were sitting there, and they were mumbling and talking, and we were talking, and we called him the chief. He had very dark hair, and he had a little knot in the back, and he had a feather out the back. And so we called him the chief, and the squaw was beside him. Well, every few minutes, the chief would lean over to his squaw and say, Squaw, get him, chief, a glass of water. And she'd bob right up and run down the end of the car and come back with a cup of water. Well, this went on for, 2 or 3 times. And another occasion, before we got to Oklahoma City, the chief bent over and said, get him, chief, glass of water. And so she went on down, but it took her 5 minutes to come back. But she did come back with a cup of water. She gave it to him, and he said, Squaw, why you taking so long get chief water? She said, me half a weight, white woman sitting on well. You can put that one in your book. That's, by the way, it's a true story.
Well, it looks like we've got something as interesting as the lectures themselves. Thank you for coming out, and we have another program coming up in December, so come on around.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
You have your book with the pictures?
Yeah, right here.
Yeah, when you mentioned you got the flag at Ipanema, I thought you knew already about the fact what the Germans had done there.
No, I didn't realize.
The Germans landed right on top of it, and that allowed them. That was the key to the Belgian defense.
Yeah, that's right. And
to land right on it.
Yeah. And this is when they bombed Malmedy. When I was down there. It shows you what a mess it was. That's a man there that in a gun with German, a Nazi, first SS. But he had been apparently decapitated.
Notice the treads in the side of the tank for protection.
Yeah, that's right. Now here, that's a machine gunner there. Now here's the, these are the massacre of the Stavelot. There's that little boy that had his head crushed in. That's the woman and children. That's the...
Actually, several. There's two legs here. It looks like it's a hand. Okay.
Yeah.
There's a